Hey guys, we've had a lot of people email us or call us and ask a lot of questions about saddle repair. And if you've got a shop and you're doing any kind of leather work, you've probably had some people say, hey, can you do some saddle repair? Can you replace stirrup leathers? A lot of that stuff isn't very hard, but it's one of those things where if you've never messed with saddles before, if not someone that's accustomed to being around them, you may not know what you can take off, what you can't take off, how do you open certain parts of it up. So what I want to do is I want to start doing a few videos as we have those types of repairs come in the shop and do a little video on different aspects of repair, stirrup leathers and different things. And that way you can see how I do it, and maybe that'll help you to where you can do your own saddle repair, or even offer that as a service. If you have a shop as a business, you can offer that as a service to your customers. But in this video right here, what we're going to do is I'm just going to show you how I break a saddle down before I'm going to wash it. You definitely don't have to break them down completely to wash them or condition the leather or anything, but it's something that we do in the shop called a clean oil and polish. It's a COP, and we do those. It's just one of the services that we offer, and the way we do them is we tear the saddle completely down, wash all the pieces individually as best we can, get everything clean, conditioned, and then put the saddle back together, shine any silver that may be associated with it. And so that's what we do in the shop. And so in this video, I'm just going to show you how I break one down. It's not very hard, but I'll at least show you what you can take off and how easy it comes off, and what you shouldn't take off or take apart. Because depending on the repair that you might be doing, you might take a saddle down further than where we're going to take it today. If you're doing sheepskin replacement or sheep wool replacement on a saddle, you're going to take the skirts completely off. We won't. But you'll see that in the video, and it'll just kind of give you an idea. If you've never been around saddles or don't know a lot about them, it'll give you an idea of how you can open them up and work on them to get different things done, stuff like that. So let's get to the video and I'll show you how I do that. All right, so this is a saddle that we made a few years back. We're gonna go ahead and break it down. We're gonna clean this saddle, and this saddle will be for sale. It's one that a guy's trading in, and so we're gonna go ahead and get it cleaned up and polished and everything and get it looking good for pictures, and that way we can kind of go through it and make sure that everything's tight. You gotta remember, when you're doing a clean oil and polish, you need to be sure that you're checking the riggings, checking stirrup leathers, looking out for things that may be broke that the owner didn't know were broke, just because they're using it all the time. And sometimes guys aren't real good at looking at their equipment to make sure that everything's good, or they just may not be able to see something where you'll be able to find it because we're about to open it up. What we're going to do is go ahead and take these. These are bucking rolls. This is a Wade saddle that we've built here, and I think it's a 15. Yeah, it's a 15-inch Wade tree. And I don't build a lot of Wade, so this is kind of a cool saddle to work on, just because I don't build a ton of them down in my country. We're going to go ahead and tear this one down and get it ready. And so what we'll do first is just take these bucking rolls off, and we want to save all our pieces. What I like to do is use just a coffee can or something, just some kind of little bucket where you can throw all the parts in there, and that way you don't lose them. Because if you get 2 or 3 of these broke down at one time and you go working on saddles, you'll forget whose was what or whatever, and a lot of this stuff you can reuse. So we'll take the bucking rolls off and we'll set those right there. And on a Wade saddle, the way the bucking roll attaches is through that swell screw there, and so the swell screw is already out. If you're not doing a Wade, you know, you'll just have a swell screw there. You'll take it out just like I did there. And now what I'll do is go ahead and take the strings and open them. If these are really dry rot, we've kind of got a little policy in the store that we've always done. If people bring a saddle in to get cleaned, if the strings are rotten and they break, when we go to take them apart, we try not to break them, but if they do just break because they're brittle and dry and haven't been conditioned, then the customer gets charged for new strings, because we can't help that they're dry when you brought them to us. So that's just kind of our little policy. These aren't too bad, so if they're good, we try not to break them. But if they are dry rot and you can't get this blood knot taken off, then you can just cut them off with side dikes or something, and then just put new strings in it, because you're not going to get it opened up. But then we'll just undo the blood knot on the string and then pull the concho. And we'll pull that concho out, and then we'll set that over there. So once you get this concho off there, then you'll see a rosette, a leather concho basically, and they call that a rosette. And those are usually just nailed down in place. And so you just got to use some type of prying tool to get underneath that nail and pull that out. And then that'll slide right off the strings as well. Then we'll take that concho and pitch it in our bucket. Your strings on your saddle will be done various ways. The way I do mine, I do not bore a hole in my tree and run my strings through my saddle tree. I don't, because I don't want big holes in my tree like that. Down in this country, it's so humid and there's so much salt in the air and everything else from being near the coast and the humidity and the rainfall and everything. I want to keep that tree as waterproof as possible, and a big 3/8 or 1/2 inch hole through there for strings just invites water. Every one we tear apart that has the strings running through the tree, that tree is dry. That tree, the wood in that tree is rotten where those holes are. And so we don't do that. We screw our strings to our saddle. A lot of guys might not think that's a good idea, but usually the ones that think that live in drier climates. And we've just found that it works better for us down here in southern Texas and central Texas because of the amount of rainfall and humidity in the air. It just works better for us. And so we'll do that. And then, so on mine, if your strings do run through the tree, the strings will still be in there, but you'll be able to lift this seat jockey up because you'll be able to pull them out through the bottom of the tree. Mine here are just through this deal here, and so it works much better for us. And now we'll take, and there's going to be one more nail. You know, and different saddles are going to have different nails. If you're working on a production saddle, that's going to have 4,000 staples for one concho. So just be prepared for that aggravation. Production company people love staples. They absolutely love them, and they use them like crazy. Now this has a little rope strap on there. Get in there and pry that up and probably just tear the leather. There we go. And then that's our little rope strap. Throw that in the bucket. And so that's lifted up. That's all that holds the front on. So if you're looking at your saddle that you're working on, you'll have a swell screw, a concho, strings, or whatever you're going to have here that'll hold your latigo keeper. That'll all be in one, holding the front seat of that jockey down. And if your seat's built right, it should all be glued down here. We don't break all this glue loose for the seat. That's far enough to be able to inspect the rigging. Make sure that the rigging doesn't have a cut or wear marks or something where it's stretching out or the screws aren't backing out. We can inspect all that. Stitching all looks good, everything like that. So that's enough to be able to look at that. And now we'll move down here and we'll do the other side. We'll just go all the way around the saddle, remove all the conchos, rosettes, and get everything unpinned, and we'll pull the housing off. Now a spike awl comes in handy anytime you're, really even leather work in general. You'll see me use it a lot in a lot of my videos because it works really good. Be able to get into different areas. And again, these strings are screwed, so we're going to go ahead and just unscrew those. That's our seat ear. And so now you can see we've got the housing exposed. There's a nail right there. That's what's holding that housing in place. But we're going to wait on that and go ahead and get this other string. We're going to go ahead and get this side. Now usually you'll have a rig catcher on this side, which is going to look just like this. But the customer requested it to be back here in the rear instead of in the front. And so we put it right there. A lot of guys prefer it right there. I don't like that being blank. I'll probably go to where I put two of them on there just to have it. But I think it looks funny without a rig catcher right there. So now we can inspect that. Looks like the rope strap got pulled off. So see, I said keep an eye out for anything that might be broken. So that's one thing that was busted. And he knew that. But pair of these, I call them side dikes. I don't know what they're called, but These little cutters here are very, very handy. I've had this pair forever, but they're really handy for grabbing tacks. You can get down in there. I did grind this side down. When they come to you, they've got a bevel on this side too. I go ahead and grind that smooth so that where they touch is right smooth with that, so that you can get really close. And I can pull staples or tacks that are kind of in the leather a little bit with those. So that pair is very, very handy. I'll go ahead and take the flank gird off. Put that on the bench. Now on this side here, he's missing a saddle string, so one of them broke. On this saddle, since we're selling it, we might just put new strings on it. That way they all match. But he had one missing right here, so take note of that. Sometimes it's good when you're taking a saddle apart to have a notepad or just their work order or something that you can jot notes down on. So as you run across things that are broke, you can jot them down, and then you won't forget about them the next week when you're putting the saddle back together or whatever. So that's just kind of a little tip right there, is kind of write it down when you see it, because you will forget about it. Okay, so this is one of my favorite little tools here when doing repair or working on saddles in general. It's just the cheapest set of screwdrivers you can buy at Harbor Freight or wherever. We just bought a pack of them, and this screwdriver here we ground down and made it real smooth. It was a flathead screwdriver, and then we bent the end to where it's bent slightly. And it's just basically, now it's a nice smooth, it's not going to scratch anything or cut anything, and it's just like a pry bar. And it's longer than our normal, the one I've been using that's real short. So sometimes getting into spots in a saddle, it's a little difficult, but with this, it's a lot easier. This housing's not really far up there underneath the seat, but sometimes they're pretty good ways. My housings now, I use screws in there, so sometimes there'll be a screw right here instead of this nail. But you'll just have to explore and see what's in there. But now I put a screw right there, so then I just zip out a screw and the housing pops right off. It's a lot easier than prying a nail out. But then we'll have one on the other side too. Now once the screw's out, the housing should pop right off. Sometimes there will be two nails or staples if you're working on a production saddle. Sometimes there's staples on this little frog up underneath here, so you'll have to flip the saddle over and get it from underneath. There'll be some nails or staples under there. This saddle, I don't put anything there. I don't put any nails underneath my saddle tree, because if they back out, they're going to back out towards the horse, so I don't want them doing that, so I don't put any in there. But sometimes you will see a couple nails or staples right there for sure. And so the housing's off now. Now we can inspect our rigging. Now this is a flat plate rig, and so the whole rigging is one piece. That's a critical point there. You want to be sure that that rigging ties in still well with the flank D, and that there's no tears or wears in there, wear marks in there or anything. And then just inspect the whole rigging, make sure the rivets are all there and they all look good. And then your stitches on your back, if it's stitched, sometimes they'll be with lugs, which are just your little strips of Latigo lace leather that'll go through two holes, and then that gets put up here and then nailed to the tree. You just want to make sure those are tight. Usually if we do a saddle and it's got those on there, a lot of times we'll replace them just because they're old, and while you're there you might as well replace them. But that's something to check there. And so that's basically it on the saddle part. So the seat is completely, we can get up in there and wash. Like I said, I wouldn't break this glue down. If you've got something you need to inspect further in the saddle, you can certainly pry that seat up more. Just be sure and glue it back down whenever you're putting it back together. Don't leave a seat unglued, because it'll shift around and stretch kind of wonky. On a saddle like this that has the mule wrap on there, we would not take that off, because usually a guy gets that mule wrap just the way he wants it. It's kind of broke in, and so we'll leave it unless they request for us to take it off. When it comes to another type of saddle, like a team roping saddle or a lot of Texas cowboy saddles, they'll have rubber on there. A lot of times we will cut that rubber off, because I want to inspect the horn wrap and I want to inspect the cap. I want to be sure that all that's still tight. And so rubber's cheap. They burn it up anyway and replace it all the time. So we just cut it right off, pull all that off so we can see that horn. So rubber we will take off. Mule wrap, Latigo wraps, we usually leave those on as long as they look good and they're not stretched out and nasty. All right, the stirrup leathers are fairly self-explanatory. The trick is getting them back in, and you can certainly, there's a trick we used to do when I was learning. The man that taught me did on repair saddles was you take this hobble strap off, save that. We're going to look at that too. And we'll take the stirrup off. That just unbuckles. So you've got a Blevins sleeve normally. There's different types of buckles down here, but the Blevins buckle is the most common. So that's the one you'll see the most. Just got a sleeve, either a 3-inch or 2.5, and then a pin. They call these the pins, and it'll have two little pins on there that go in these holes. And then this slides right over top of it. You want to, when you do this, you want to kind of look at the stirrup leathers and see if, you know, this is a safety issue, so we want to kind of inspect those right now before we clean it, because we don't want to clean it and then think, oh, they don't look that bad, when really they're pretty dry rot. So I'm looking at these and I'm thinking they're getting pretty bad. They've got a thin spot and kind of a curled spot right there. He's stretched out some, which they'll do, and so we're probably just going to put new ones on here. While we're there, be done with it, have new ones on. Saddle sales, we'll get paid for that. But it's better to go ahead and do that. That way the man that buys it doesn't have to worry about it. But want to inspect those, kind of look at them. These are still soft and pliable. The one thing with stirrup leathers I always do is fold them where they're riding them the most. And if that leather cracks across there when you fold it real hard, then they're dry rot and they're not going to last very long. So even though they're still together, they're going to break. If they're soft and pliable, which these actually are, but we do have some cracking down lower. So if we got somebody taller than him that was going to ride it, he'd be in these holes, and these are the ones I'd worry about. So we've got some cracking going on right there, you can see. That's something to be concerned about. I've had them where they're so dry and brittle that when you fold it like that real tight, they'll just break. And so those are definitely need to be replaced. But one of the tricks you can do when you pull these out, if you want, is to tie a string, like a piece of parachute cord or nylon string or something here. Something, you know, thicker. Don't use kite string or something, but because you're going to be pulling on that later. But tie it to the end here. When we pull the stirrup leather out, it'll take that string and route it through the ground seat, and then you can just tie a knot in that so it doesn't fall out, and it can stay in there while we're washing it and doing everything else. And when we go to put the stirrup leathers back in, you can punch a small hole right here on the end, tie that top end of that string to here, and then pull your stirrup leathers up and through. And that works out pretty good. We've gotten to where we don't do it anymore just because we forget, we kind of just got away from it. We put the stirrup leathers back in with the saddle on its back on top of the bench, and it's really not that bad. But some saddles can be more difficult, but we'll show you that in another video on how to get these back in. But to get these out, normally you just pull the fender and that stirrup leather will come out. And that's it, because it's going all the way up in the saddle, around the bar of the tree, and then back out underneath. And that's how they hang on that tree bar. And so you're just pulling that out. And that's all it takes to get those out of there. Like I said, getting them back in sometimes is a little trickier, but getting them out is easy. But we're going to do that. Now, if these stirrup leathers were good and I was going to leave them, I would just wash them, leave them together. I wouldn't do anything to that. But since I'm going to replace them, I'm going to go ahead and before we wash it, we'll just bust the stirrup leather off of here and be done with it and throw it away and just wash the fenders, and then we'll put brand new stirrup leathers in there and we'll be done. Now, a lot of my work stands for the repair shop have these boxes down here on the bottom, and that's to put everything in that's for this saddle. So as you're working on the saddle, your stirrup leathers, your flank girt, your can with all your parts in there, all that can go down here, so you always know where it is. And we try not to rotate saddles and stuff. If you're a one-man shop and you're the one doing it, it's pretty easy. If you've got 2 or 3 repair guys, like we used to have, and you got multiple saddles, 10 saddles or so going at any given time, even more important to be sure that you keep stuff with the saddle it came off of, because when all these saddles get broke down, a lot of parts get confused and you can't remember, did that flank girt go with that saddle or did that breast collar go with that one? And so I highly advise, if you're in a bigger shop or doing more than one repair saddle at a time, have you some type of system, either a box under the drawdown. This is really not a drawdown, but a box underneath the stand, or another saddle box or something to keep all your parts together with. Now, as far as billets and latigos, I don't take them off of the saddle as long as the lacing is good. If this lacing is still nice and it's tight and it's not dry rotted or trying to break, then we'll just leave it, because there's no reason to take it off. If it's fine, we'll just leave it, and we'll wash all that on the saddle. Same thing with the Latigo. We'll take the Latigo and we'll unroll it, and we'll inspect it. That's a brand new Latigo he put on there. That thing's not very old at all. It's in really good shape. So we're just going to roll that back up, and we're going to leave it on the saddle, and then when we wash it, we'll stretch this out and we'll wash this as well. Alright, so on top of the bench here, we got our 2 stirrups. We're going to check treads, make sure the treads are okay. As long as they're not sliding around, they're probably fine. They may look bad, but as long as they're not loose and where they can slide around the stirrup, they're probably fine. Blevins, one thing you want to look at on sleeves, as you can see, this sleeve here is pretty dry rot, and the leather's just tore up. And so that's not going to in itself hurt anybody. This thing here is mainly the outside of the sleeve being covered in leather, is just to kind of protect the horse, because that can be up against him at times. But theoretically, you can still use that sleeve. We're putting new stirrup leathers on this saddle, and even if we weren't, I've got enough old sleeves that are, you know, this shape or better, and I'll replace one like this for nothing, just because I don't like that sharp edge being exposed to my horse. So I don't think the customer would either. So we go ahead and replace them. And even if we put brand new sleeves on a saddle, if the Blevins are good, the stirrup leather's good, but the sleeves are bad, we'll go ahead and just put a pair of new sleeves on there and charge them. They're not expensive, but you can definitely do that. And so, but we're replacing them, so that's all good. We've got our bucking rolls, which we'll wash separately. Usually on bucking rolls, just a note on that, I don't ever untie this, because usually a man gets these tweaked after a while of riding in the saddle, fiddling with them. He finally gets them exactly where he wants them, and as long as you don't disrupt this area right here, you can screw them right back on the saddle, and you don't have to worry about messing up his system there in the seat. So I don't usually mess with those. We'll just wash this really good and try to get some oil on that leather, because there's nothing really pulling on these or anything. They're just sitting in the seat, so I'm not too worried about it. I'd rather him leave them the way he got them. Hobble straps, these are always a deal that a lot of times they don't get oiled, they don't get cleaned and conditioned, because they're just dumb little hobble straps. But a lot of times I'll go ahead and try to clean them and try to oil them and just kind of see what they look like. They're a very important piece of equipment, which we'll talk about in another video, but it is a safety deal to keep the stirrup from spinning. And so you need hobble straps all the time on saddles when you're riding them. But if they look real bad, I'll just throw new ones on there. And I usually don't even charge for them if I do it. It's just kind of a nice thing to do. And then we've got all our strings, which we'll take all these apart like we did the first one. But that's our strings with our conchos or our rosettes, and then our bucket with all our conchos and parts. I save all the nails and all the screws. Usually when I go back, the saddle goes back together, I'll usually do new nails and new screws. And then I save these for whatever. But usually when you're screwing those things in, a lot of times you'll round out the head of them a little bit. This one's not real bad, but they just kind of look dingy. And to me, if you clean a saddle and put new screws, swell screws especially, it just makes it look nicer. You're not putting a nasty old swell screw in there and washer, and you're talking pennies. So I go ahead and replace them, but that's just me. And then so we want to get all our parts, make sure we have all our parts in this bucket so we know where they are. Put our hobble straps in there. We'll even throw the Blevins in there just so I'm reminded that they were bad, so we're going to replace them. And then we'll take the stirrups and everything else and put those in that bin underneath the stand. The can down there as well. Now usually flank girts take a beating, and so they're usually very, very dry and mistreated. A lot of times the pockets will be spurred off, believe it or not. Like, you know, it's just the nature of the flank girt. Where this sits is right where our spur is going to hit it. This one's been beat up pretty good. But if they're real bad, I'll replace them. If the whole girt is super bad, I just tell them they need a new girt. I mean, they're not worth fixing most of the time. And so I don't enjoy sticking a nasty, dry rotted, hard piece of leather that's been covered in crap and mud and everything else for however old the back girt is, and then me stick it in my sewing machine and chance breaking needles and getting that stuff down in my machine. So when it comes to flank girts, a lot of times if they're really bad, they just need to buy a new one. I'm not gonna fix them. When it comes down to my flank girts, there's always a rivet right here that holds this metal clip-in D. Want to make sure that's in there tight. This is an older flank girt where the rivet, we didn't run it all the way through. And so these particularly I'm worried about a lot of times. So we'll be careful to inspect that a lot. Now that rivet goes all the way through. But you just want to look at your buckles, make sure they're good. If it's good stainless steel hardware, the buckles should be fine. So if you do have to build a new flank girt, you can cut that buckle out and put it on a new flank and you'll be fine. But we'll get that washed and conditioned as well. One of the things that you want to be sure to do anytime you're working on a saddle, and I don't care if the saddle's in there to get new strings put in it, one of the first things you need to do before you open up a saddle at all or do anything to it, you need to check the tree. If the tree is broken in the saddle, our policy is we don't work on it, because it's one thing, it's a safety deal. If I tell them the tree's broken, they say, oh, well, I'm just going to ride colts with it, which is not a good idea. But if they say, well, I'm just going to use it here or whatever, I don't do any repair on it, because then I don't want that coming back on me, even though I told them the tree was broke. So whenever a tree is broken in a saddle, that saddle is done. You can replace a tree, and there's saddle makers that do. We've done it before too. We charge a lot of money to replace a tree, and honestly, most saddles, the tree is not worth replacing. Unless it's a custom saddle, like our saddles have a lifetime warranty on the tree. We've replaced a few over the years. But that's an investment. We're backing our customer. It's not cost effective, but for them it is, because we're backing it, we're warrantying it. But as far as like you have a rope and saddle, trophy saddle, something like that, just an old saddle with a broke tree, and you want to get it replaced because the tree's broken, it's not going to be cost effective. All the old leather's going back on there, and the tree is new, but the saddle is old. And so it's like replacing the frame on your truck. It's just not a good idea. It's not worth it. Just go get another one and call it good. But I've done it before where we've gotten halfway through on repair jobs, and then all of a sudden, well, the tree's broke. Well, why? We've already done stirrup leathers, we've already done all this work, and the tree's broken, and now we don't even charge the customer. The saddle's unusable. So the saddle's no good because the tree's broken. That's something we should have checked before. So one of the things you want to be sure and do is every time a saddle comes into your shop, get in the habit of checking the tree first. And it's become such a habit with me that saddles come in, my saddle's new, it doesn't matter if it's a new saddle or what, but I'm always checking the tree. Just grab the cantle, grab the horn, and press those two together, or try to. It shouldn't move at all. You shouldn't be able to get any kind of movement out of the tree or the frame of the saddle. So if you're getting any of that, then the tree is probably broke. And then at that point you can go to digging, and we'll do a video on trying to find a break in a tree and how to check on that. But that's one of the things you want to be sure and do before you do any kind of work on a saddle, because a lot of times people just don't know that it's broke. It may not even be hurting a horse. It may be functioning completely right. It may even be roping out of it without any trouble. But if the tree is broke, you want to be sure to let them know that. So that's one thing we do. We always check the tree first time when it hits the stand. We're going to check it. Usually it's on the sales floor. If somebody brings one in, that's the first thing I check is the tree. And I've stopped a lot of repairs from turning into nightmares, because when they came in with it, the first thing I did was check the tree, and I say, well, your tree's broke. Did you know it was broke? And a lot of times they'll say, no, I had no idea. You know, it's been riding fine or whatever, but I did have a horse roll over the other day or whatever happened. And so then you show them, and then they say, well, what do you want to do? And I always tell them it's not really worth doing anything to it, you know. And so then that saves them the trouble of having to worry about fixing anything, and they don't waste the money, I don't waste the time, and it's done, and they can just go about looking for another saddle, or, you know, a lot of times it's an extra saddle or something they had. But that's the first thing you want to do before you get even to this stage right here. I would check the tree. If you get in this stage and forgot, go ahead and check it. Anytime you think about it, go ahead and check it if you haven't, because you don't want to keep going and get to the end and find out the tree's broke and you just did all this repair, and the customer's not going to be real happy about paying for that if the tree was broke and you didn't know it from the beginning. But that's breaking down a saddle. I hope that helped you. Like I said, it's a little intimidating, but it's not bad. There's really not anything in here that you can tear up. It's just screws and nails and little blood knots, and you can get one tore open and ready to wash. So if you're looking for another little service to offer, even if you don't know a lot about saddles, cleaning and oiling saddles is going to be something that's really good, that you can make some really good money on, and you don't have any cost involved in it except soap and labor. So soon we'll do a video and I'll show you my clean, oil, and polish process, and show you exactly what we do with a saddle that's in this state and how we wash it and clean it. So I appreciate you guys watching. We'll see you in the next video.